Welcome back. Dan, you brought up the question of Libya.
Yep.
Now, that sort of brings up also the question of Hillary Clinton's attitude,
Oh yes.
which she brings into politics with her.
That famous statement.
Yeah, now the way she went to Libya and said, you know, we came, we saw, and he died. I mean, that you can't believe a foreign minister or a secretary of state saying such a thing.
Absolutely.
in any country. I mean, after all, that was a state.
Yeah.
And what happened after that? What happened after that was that the American ambassador himself got slaughtered
Yeah.
under her watch.
Yeah.
And now the whole of Europe is being invaded by immigrants who are using the Libyan coast,
Yeah.
essentially. So, and they have turned that into a failed state. They have turned Syria into a non-state.
Yeah.
Iraq already is a non-state. And you find a whole swathe of the globe now without any government as such. So, I mean, and also the way she had said about Julian Assange, let's drone him. I mean, how can anybody possibly associate that kind of talk with a person who claims to be politically correct and, you know, who's all for the poor and, you know, for getting everybody together, looking after the minorities? What's going on there? I mean, if you just look at her attitude.
I don't know, maybe she's been associating with Chandrika too often.
that is the.
Of course, I was joking, but for somebody who's so well educated, as she is,
That's the thing.
she's using rhetoric of a sort that her husband never did.
Yeah, absolutely. He
Bill
was quite
Far more sagacious.
That's right.
And this kind of rhetoric you've not heard from any serious American political figure, certainly not in the Democratic camp. I mean, the last would have been Barry Goldwater in the Republican camp. But it's not the kind of rhetoric that's associated with the liberal democratic tradition. But what is interesting is that she's not being criticized by the liberal media. The establishment, the liberal establishment, is 100% or 200% with Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, the press and all that.
Oh, absolutely.
But how do you account for the fact that, you know, if you take the crowds, the attendance, no, people have been talking about that, whereas Trump's rallies are attended by vast enthusiastic crowds, that you don't see the same enthusiasm or the same numbers at Hillary Clinton's rallies. I mean, what do you ascribe that to? Because given the heat that this thing has generated, given the fact that there are people who are willing to go to Trump's rallies and disrupt them, how is it that Hillary's meetings are not all that well attended?
Well, we will know in a week as to whether Trump is managing to get his activist base, whereas the Democratic activists will go out to vote, but they don't necessarily turn up at rallies. But even in terms of the big meetings, there is an exception. The exception is when the Obamas, especially Michelle Obama, is campaigning for Hillary. Then you have very big crowds. I mean, she's filling football stadiums.
Yeah.
That's because of what the Obamas are seen to stand for. Now, in the case of Hillary, it's not so much a pro-Hillary surge, but
She's not exactly populist, is she?
no, she's not, but she's had to, you see, Hillary has had various phases. In terms of social policy, she has always been progressive, but within that, it's been like a piano accordion, because as First Lady, she was pushing health care, which is, of course, a populist or left-wing populist or progressive populist platform. Then she was more sort of neoliberal like her husband. But now, once again, she's picking up those progressive, socially progressive themes because of the Bernie Sanders vote base. It wasn't easy for her to get the nomination, and there's a surprisingly large number of young left of center voters who supported Bernie. So Hillary has to get those votes, and she's therefore picked a vice presidential candidate who can speak to those themes, and she herself is shifting towards the left in domestic policy, just as she is moving towards what we would call the right in foreign policy.
Yeah, and how, now when it comes to Donald Trump, he seems to have managed to get the support of some unlikely individuals. Now you take the leader of the Nation of Islam, Louis Farrakhan.
Yeah.
I mean, he is virtually canvassing for Trump, and he gives the reason for that also. He says, Gaddafi was my friend, and the way and he openly calls Clinton a wicked woman. And the way that she went about that whole thing seems to have left a very bad taste in the mouths of, Muslim black Americans, because obviously they would have had a fairly good relationship with Gaddafi. And then if you take the filmmaker Michael Moore, now he has predicted a Trump victory.
Yeah, but he's against Trump.
He claims to be against Trump.
Yeah. But he's given all the reasons why.
All the reasons why anybody should vote for.
Yeah.
Vote for Trump. I mean, when you look at his, if you sort of go through his movies that he has been making over the past couple of decades,
he's a very left-wing kind of guy.
Absolutely, he's articulating the same views that Trump has brought into the campaign, and I feel almost certain that he's a closet Trump supporter. I feel that he would end up even voting for Trump. Most probably, because if you look at his films, that is his life's work.
Yeah.
And Trump is his hope to get all those things corrected, or at least some of those things corrected.
Well, some because on domestic policies, I don't know whether there's a congruency between their views, because one of the movies that Michael Moore made, he went over to Cuba for that, is to contrast the lack of health care,
that's right,
public health care in the United States with what's available in Cuba, including for people who suffered after 9/11, those firefighters and so on.
That's right.
They had to go to Cuba to be cured because they didn't have the money for medical attention in the United States. So Trump isn't very good on, he's anti-Obamacare.
Yeah.
So one really doesn't know about that. But I have noticed, and this is sort of in support of something you're trying to say, I've noticed that very left-wing people such as John Pilger,
even Julian Assange for that matter.
Yeah, I think what has happened is they are horrified by two things. They are horrified by the hypocrisy of the Clinton candidacy. And the second thing is they are very worried about world peace. Now, they see that Hillary's stand on Syria may lead to some kind of confrontation with Russia. So they've come out far more critical of Hillary than they are of Trump. Zizek himself, he's anti-Trump, but he's aghast at Hillary. So you have that as well, because even the liberal establishment like Foreign Policy magazine, they're pro-Hillary, but they're saying that, they're quoting scholars and diplomats and so on who say that it's not that Hillary is sounding very militant in public, but actually she's going to negotiate over Syria with the Russians. They are surprised that what the Hillary foreign policy team is saying in private is far more aggressive than what they are saying in public. And that there are guys,
and that is just about the last thing that most of them would want.
Yeah, and this group is, the nickname is the Blob. That's the liberal hawkish foreign policy establishment. Evidently, they are just waiting for Hillary to win so that they can confront Assad and they can even confront the Russians. Now, that's a very strange thing, because usually,
Strange and dangerous.
strange and very dangerous, usually when a liberal democrat comes in, relations improve with Russia, with China and so on. But here, evidently there's a whole phalanx of foreign policy eggheads who are waiting to confront Russia in Syria, and that's extremely dangerous. I've seen that only once before, and not to this virulent degree, and that is those who were in the JFK administration who actually took the United States into Vietnam and into Cuba with the Bay of Pigs, but John F. Kennedy himself limited that involvement. Some say that he was assassinated because of that. But it was the Democratic administration that took the United States into Vietnam, which is why there was this famous book called The Best and the Brightest by David Halberstam. The point being that it was not the dumb right-wing rednecks who took the United States into the quagmire of Vietnam, but the cleverest liberal democratic foreign policy intellectuals. So I'm worried that we may see something of that sort again.
Yeah, history repeating itself in the most unpleasant manner.
In a far worse sense. In a far worse sense, because nobody, certainly not JFK, except over the Cuban Missile Crisis, where they thought that this was on the United States' doorstep and they had to do something. But nobody really wanted to take the risk of a confrontation with Russia. But now, in the United States, there are those in the Clinton campaign, very serious people who are itching to play it rough and tough with President Putin. Now, I'm not sure that that's the smartest thing to do.
Of course. Now, how would say a Hillary victory or a Trump victory affect Sri Lanka? Now we can sort of say offhand that generally speaking, Republican governments have been more inclined to cooperate with states combating terrorism like that of Sri Lanka at that time. Now, say in 2002, during the last Republican government, I mean, they did the American Defense Department did a study of the Sri Lankan conflict. They studied both sides, the LTT as well as the Sri Lankan armed forces. That was the first study of that kind done during that conflict, during that entire 30-year conflict, and they had access to both sides. So they did that study and they made some recommendations. Virtually
and so on.
Yeah, that's right. Virtually all those recommendations were implemented by the Rajapaksa government, except for two, I think, and that was those were just fairly minor. I mean, matters of procuring planes from from Israel rather than Russia and that kind of thing. Now that certainly helped
there was even a cluster bomb recommendation.
Oh yes. That they even recommended cluster bombs. Now that is one of the two recommendations that were not implemented, but the rest of it was all implemented.
Yeah. So the Rajapaksas were more liberal than the U.S.
ultimately.
Yeah.
And that was sort and that is the report which said in those years of gloom and absolute despondency, that was the report that said very clearly the Sri Lankan armed forces can
a very professional army.
And yeah, that they can win. They were the only people to say that. Then in 2006,
it's the PACOM report.
That's right.
PACOM report.
That's right. PACOM. The Pacific Command did the study on behalf of the Defense Department. Then
the Prime Minister sat on the report, Prime Minister Wickremesinghe.
Oh yes, but that leaked.
Yeah, of course. It was leaked to Lakshman Kathuria.
That's right.
Yeah. And then into the Sunday Times.
That's right. And what a useful thing they had done.
Extremely useful.
It was a very useful thing. Yeah. And then when you take the banning of the LTT in 2006, now Mangala Samaraweera was helped in that very substantially by people like Condoleezza Rice and that Republican set up there. If not for them, the EU would never have banned the LTT in 2006. Then in 2007, the most important thing of all, that cooperation on the question of maritime security. You know, they did an exchange of information. Probably the Americans were concerned about the build-up of, the piracy in the Sea of Somalia, and the LTT being here, and so they had an exchange of information, naval intelligence, and that is what enabled Sri Lanka to pinpoint the location of those armed ships of the LTT in 2007.
Yeah.
That, and then of course in 2008, just as the war was sort of at the beginning of 2008 really, they declared the LTT to be the deadliest
FBI
terrorist organization in the world, outranking even Al Qaeda. So at every step they seem to have helped us. But the democratic government, the moment they came into power in February 2009, they were bellowing at us to stop the war, trying to rescue Prabhakar and trying to send ships to evacuate the LTT armed forces that were sort of hemmed in Puthukudi. I mean, all that kind of thing. So how would these two candidates now, as they stand now, obviously the Obama policy may not be continued by Hillary in quite the same way, but still, how would the two candidates sort of impact Sri Lanka?
Well, I would say that in the case of Sri Lanka, we have to understand the specificities, and secondly, we have to understand the changes that have taken place in American perception. And I'm not sure that these correspond to Republican versus Democrat. I think two factors came into play in the latter stage, after the narrative that you have rolled out. One is the China factor. Now, on China, even Hillary Clinton is a little softer than Donald Trump. The Republicans, except for, of course, President Nixon, who made the opening to China, but if you're talking about the subsequent period, you would find that the Republicans are far more anti-Chinese than they're anti-Russian. The Democrats are far more anti-Russian than they're anti-Chinese. And in the second Rajapaksa term, the Americans viewed Sri Lanka through the prism of their Asian policy. That is, emerging contention with China and a strategic partnership with India. Now, I believe that that's pretty much a bipartisan policy. And even a Republican administration, I might even say especially a Republican administration, if it is more competitive towards China, more in contention than even the Democrats, then that will override the anti-terrorist factor, especially because there's no shooting war going on now.
Yeah.
The second point is that the United States has a very strange view on separatism, despite the fact that it fought this great civil war in order to keep its own country together.
Yeah.
But since the US itself broke away, though it was not part of Britain geographically, it broke away from Great Britain, seceded if you like, and its revolution was really an independent struggle, it's quite ambivalent towards the setting up of separate states. You can see that in Iraqi Kurdistan, to name just one place, Kosovo before that, they have no problem in assisting separation. And that cuts across liberal Democrat and conservative Republican camps. They don't have a problem. Concerning terrorism as well, yes, at that time, during the global war on terror, there was a degree of support for us. But again, it all depends on the terrorist movement and whether it's seen as potentially friendly or not. But most important are two other factors that few people talk about. One is the role of Britain. Since I was at the sharp end in Geneva during the war, I know that the Obama administration's policy changed after David Miliband flew in from London, having met President Rajapaksa here. Miliband and Kushner, and I got this confirmed by Bernard Kouchner himself in private conversation when I was serving in Paris, is Miliband who canvassed Hillary. And the statement of the co-chairs, which included the United States, which called upon the Tigers to lay down arms, then changed because Secretary of State Hillary Clinton had a joint press conference with David Miliband. Now, David Miliband's policy was not just a Labour policy, it's the policy that David Cameron continued. So what we are really talking about is the special relationship between the UK and the US and the important role of the Tamil diaspora in the UK. So the Tamil diaspora actually leverages the United Kingdom and uses it as a very important lobby, as it were,
Absolutely.
in Washington.
Yeah.
So now you have a situation, and actually this is something I predicted at a lecture in the Faculty of Graduate Studies of the University of Colombo in December 2004, and it was issued as part of a booklet. What is happening is that the Tamil diaspora is surfing the demographic changes, the evolutionary changes, where there's a rise of the Asian Americans, the Indians, and so on. The diaspora is surfing that wave. So you will have a situation in the West which is irrespective of whether it's the Republicans or the Democrats, the Labour Party or the Conservative Party. And that situation is one in which the Tamil diaspora is light years ahead of the Sri Lankan state. Now, of course, when we were in Geneva, we managed to defeat that. But if you take the intervening years, their profile is such that unless and until the Sri Lankan state, and may I say the majority Sinhala community, throws up its own elite, which is capable of competing, of speaking in the same language in Washington and London, then you're going to find even a Republican administration in the US or conservative administration in London tilting far more towards the minorities rather than to the Sri Lankan state.
Yeah, we'll be taking a short break. Stay with us.